morning, church. Man, it's such a blessing to see all your smiling faces. I'm only here for a couple more weeks, so I'm trying to soak in every last moment with y'all. Me and the youth group had a lock-in a couple nights. Fun. We had a lot of fun with Nerf guns. So if you find any Nerf bullets, let me know. Give them to Patrick or somebody. There's one right there. Patrick's holding one up. We'll probably be finding them for the next 6 months. So if you find a Nerf bullet, let me know, and we'll give it back to Will and them. Or throw it in the trash. So this morning, have you ever heard the idiom, like father, like son? You know, we often use it to describe a son acting similar or following in the footsteps of their father. And when I think of like father, like son, I think of some famous people whose children have followed in their footsteps. LeBron James' son, he's now in the NBA, and they play for the same team, the Los Angeles Lakers. We have a couple duos of presidents who are father and son, and they both served in office. They followed in their father's footsteps. Right? We've also had some father-son duos in the Bible. You know, Joseph was a carpenter, and so was Jesus. Right? And when you read the books of Kings and Chronicles, you see sons and fathers. Fathers who, some of them followed God, and then some of them followed idols and didn't worship God. And so those sons had to decide, hey, am I going to follow in my father's footsteps and worship God, or am I going to follow the idols? Follow the idols. And I know growing up, people always used to ask me, Drew, are you going to be a preacher like your dad? You know, and I was always like, no, I'm not going to be a preacher. Like, I can't do this public speaking thing. And you see how that worked out for me, right? Like father, like son. And so this morning we're continuing with this series on the Beatitudes, and we're at the second to last one. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. This morning I want to kind of break down that Beatitude word by word and see how making peace makes us be like our Father, God. When we make peace, we follow in our Father's footsteps, like father, like son. So let's break that down. The first word in the verse is blessed, right? And if you've been with us the past couple weeks, you know what this word means. Just to review and remind you all, this word blessed in Greek is makarios. Makarios. It's a word used to describe someone that you think is experiencing God's favor and abundance. Someone you think is experiencing blessing. Right? Like I said a couple weeks ago, I see somebody who's on the Bahamas or on the beach in the Bahamas with their toes in the sand, and I say, makarios, right? Makarios, they are blessed. They're living the good life, right? They're experiencing God's favor and abundance. And so Jesus here is saying, hey, peacemakers, you're living the good life. You know, despite what it may look like in reality, you are blessed beyond measure. You know, peacemakers are often those who are mediating between two warring parties, and oftentimes they can be hated by both sides, even though they're trying to help everybody in this situation, right? Making peace can be a tough thing to do, but despite what it looks like on the outside, Jesus is saying that in reality, the good life belongs to you, peacemakers. The good life belongs to you. Blessed are the peacemakers. Next up, we have peacemakers. You know, I think kind of like we talked about with mercy a couple weeks ago, it's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is. You know, it can be expressed in so many different ways. It's kind of like a painting. When you look at a painting, everybody has a different interpretation of what the artist was trying to do, right? And so that's kind of how it is with peace and peacemaking. Everybody has a different view of it. And for me personally, I feel like I've always defined peace as kind of like the absence of war, the absence of conflict, right? But if we go back to the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. Shalom. And this week I was kind of doing a deep dive into the meaning of shalom, and I realized that peace is so much deeper than just the absence of war and the absence of conflict. It's so much more than that. Shalom is about things being complete, things being whole. One way to think of shalom, it's kind of like a brick wall, a solid brick wall with no missing bricks. It's a whole and complete structure. Right? In the Old Testament, we see shalom. It's used in a bunch of different and interesting ways. One way, when Solomon finishes building the temple, he shaloms the temple. He finishes it. He makes it complete. Shalom in the Old Testament is also used to describe bricks and stones that have no cracks or imperfections. They're whole. They're complete. Shalom is also used to describe human relationships and interactions in the Bible. In Exodus, the law says that if your ox gets loose and tramples over your neighbor's crops and destroys them, you would be compelled to shalom your neighbor, to repay, to make restitution. You were supposed to give back to your neighbor the best of your own grain or grapes to pay what your ox had destroyed. You take what's missing and restore it to wholeness. And in Proverbs, to reconcile and to heal a broken relationship between two people is to bring shalom. So peacemakers are those who make shalom, right? The Greek word that Matthew uses in this verse, it comes from shalom. They're derivatives of one another. Peacemaking is about restoring something to harmony, to make something whole. And so peace isn't just the absence of conflict or war. It goes so much further than that. And I think about certain situations in my life. My form of peacemaking a lot of times is just fleeing from whatever conflict has arisen. Whenever peace is disturbed, I just want to get as far away from possible. I can't stand it. I try to do whatever I can to end the conflict and keep the peace. Right? But this kind of peacemaking that Jesus describes, it doesn't allow us to just sweep things under the rug and just kind of ignore. Sweeping things under the rug and just ignoring them, that's keeping the peace. Right? But Jesus doesn't say that the peacekeepers are blessed, but the peacemakers. The peacemakers. In South Africa, from 1948 to 1990, they had this period that was riddled with racial segregation and just violence. Many people were the victims of human rights violations, hate crimes, injustice. And whenever that period ended and the nation was more united, they erected this program called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This commission invited witnesses who were victims of those awful injustices to give statements in front of the committee about what they had experienced, to tell the truth about what really had happened, to bring their issues to the forefront. And instead of just sweeping them under the rug, they displayed them for all to know what had gone on. That's peacemaking. You know, when the wall falls down and it crumbles apart, you can't just sweep the bricks under the rug and call that peace. Right? And that's a hard thing to do. Like, I couldn't imagine sitting through one of these meetings and just hearing all of the awful and the painful things that these people had been through, but that's peacemaking. Right? Bringing wholeness where there's enmity, love where there's hatred, harmony where there's division. Making things whole again. That's what a peacemaker does. And maybe in your life, peacemaking isn't as dramatic as the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Maybe peacemaking in your life looks like forgiving a friend, restoring y'all's relationship. Maybe it's trying to restore familial relationships that have just gone sour. Maybe it looks like speaking out against the violence and division in our world. But remember, it's not blessed are the peace wishers or the peace hopers or the peace dreamers or the peace lovers or the peace talkers. Blessed are the peace makers, for they will be called children of God. For they will be called children of God. Next up, we have that very word. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. You know, in our lives, we define ourselves by so many different things, right? If someone comes up to you on the street and they say, "Who are you?" Right? I'm probably going to say, "Oh, I'm a student. I'm interning at Northwest Church of Christ." You might tell them where you work. You might tell them that you like to play guitar or paint or write. You might tell them that you're a mother, that you're a father. And if I'm back in my hometown and someone asks me, "Who are you?" I'm going to say, "I'm Brian and Sarah Mickey's son," right? My mom works at the college and my dad worked in the school system, and so most people know me by the fact that I'm a Mickey. But whenever we make peace, those things that we identify ourselves with, our jobs, our hobbies, those things pale in comparison to who we are as a child of God. They pale in comparison to the fact that we're called children. Right? And my parents are awesome. But being a child of God, it's way better than being called the child of Brian and Sarah Mickey. You know, what if when someone says, "Who are you?" the first words that came out of your mouth were, "I'm a child of God." Right? I'm a child of God. If that was your first response, people might give you some odd looks. That might be a little different. But what if we let that calling as children of God define our lives? Right? What if our status as a child of God was the most important title we have? What if being like our Father was our most important goal? What if? I remember growing up, when we would go to different schools or different cities for a swim meet or some kind of school event, our coaches would always say this. They'd say, "Remember who you are and remember whose you are." Right? Remember who you are and remember whose you are. And being called a child of God fulfills both of those commands. Right? Remember who you are. God is all that we are, right? He is our identity. And remember whose you are. We are His. We are children of God. And as we long to bring this wholeness and this shalom and this restoration to our broken world, let's live with confidence. Right? Let's live with confidence in who we are and whose we are. Right? And you've got to have this kind of mindset when you're making peace, because it's not an easy or a safe job by any means. Right? When we're truly making peace, you're kind of sticking your neck out there, right? You're kind of putting yourself at risk sometimes. But no matter what other people have to say or how they choose to treat us, we can have confidence, knowing that in our peacemaking, we're becoming more and more like our Father, and nothing in creation can separate us from His love. Right? What a blessing it is to be children of God, to be called children of God. What a blessing it is. Next word I want to focus on is children. That's the blessing of this beatitude. The reason that the peacemakers are living the good life is because they're called children of God. The last point and this point they kind of meld together. The other day, my mom, she walked into the pharmacy, and there was this girl that was working at the desk, and my mom saw her, or she saw my mom, and she said, "Are you Drew Mickey's mama?" And my mom was a little bit confused, and she was like, "Yes," and she was like, the girl was like, "Yeah, you look like him. You look like him. Or I guess he looks like you." Right? I went to high school with that girl. We weren't necessarily friends. We just kind of knew each other. And the minute she saw my mom for the first time, she said, "That's Drew Mickey's mama." right? She knew I was her child, right? And I remember growing up, there was a bunch of times whenever I was with my parents, and my mom would just say, just out of the blue, she'd just say, Drew, you have your dad's eyes. Right, Drew, you have your dad's nose, your dad's hands. As children, we take after our parents. Right? Children resemble their parents. And not only should our identity as God's children be the most important title that we own, but it should also begin to change parts of who we are. Right? As God's children, we should resemble our Father. Like father, like son. And that's the incredible blessing that Jesus gives us with this beatitude. When we fight for shalom, right, when we long to make relationships right and bring wholeness, we look like God. We make people think of God. Right, when we're willing to step in the middle of conflict and stand up for what is right, even when both sides might hate us. People will say, man, you've got your Father's eyes. You know, when we mediate between two friends who have broken their friendship and we try to bring shalom into that, people will say, man, you're Brian Mickey's son. You're God's son, aren't you? You remind me of him. Right? When we stand up and we speak out against the injustice that is present in our world, when we make peace, people can't help but notice that we take after our Father. We share in God's likeness, like father, like son, like father, like daughter. The apple never falls far from the tree, right? The apple never falls far from the tree. When we truly strive to bring restoration and wholeness and a harmony into this broken world, we bear the image of God himself. We bear the image of God himself. Like father, like son. And man, what a blessing that is. What a blessing that is. There's one final word that I want to take a look at this morning, and it's God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Right, if we're going to be peacemakers, we got to make peace the right way. Right? You got to look to the author of peace himself, right? The Prince of Peace. God has given us a perfect example of peacemaking, of how to be a peacemaker. And here's what it is. This is his example. You know, ever since the fall, when sin came into the world, man had lost peace with God. Right? That relationship had been fractured. And so in the form of Jesus, God came to make peace with us on earth. To make peace with us on earth. And the Jewish people, and even Jesus' own disciples, they had spent their whole lives waiting and hoping for this Prince of Peace that they read and heard about in Isaiah. They thought this Prince of Peace would come with armies and chariots and mass weapons to free them from the Romans. You know, they expected their Messiah to make peace by the sharpness of his sword, right? To make peace by the power of his armies, to make peace by crushing Israel's enemies and raising them up into the greatest nation in the world. That's what the Jews had in mind for their Prince of Peace. But that's not what God had in mind. That's not the kind of peace that God had in mind. You know, Paul writes in Colossians Colossians chapter 1, verse 19 and 20. For in him, that being Jesus, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on heaven or on earth, making peace by the blood of his cross. Making peace by the blood of his cross. Right? That's not what the Jews expected. You know, instead of making peace by crushing his enemies, the Prince of Peace let his enemies crush him. Right? Instead of making peace by wounding his enemies, his own wounds heals his enemies. Instead of smiting down his enemies with fire from heaven to make peace and take over the world, he spilled his own blood to make peace. That's the ultimate example of peacemaking. It's the ultimate example. It's the most unlikely yet perfect example of peacemaking. You know, sometimes in order to fix the brick wall, to bring shalom, to fill in the missing piece, sometimes your own well-being is that brick. Right? Sometimes your own well-being is that brick. In Jesus' case, the missing piece that would bring shalom to the whole world, the missing piece that would make whole again the relationship between God and man, was his own blood. The missing piece was his own blood. My dad showed me this image whenever I was talking to him about this idea of peacemaking. It's of a father and a son, and the father is giving parts of himself to make his son whole. He's taking parts of himself to fill in his son's missing pieces. The missing piece in the brick wall of my life and yours was the blood of Jesus. His own well-being, his own life. That's what it looks like to make peace on God's terms. True peace sometimes comes at a cost. Sometimes it comes at a cost. Yeah, I think of people like Martin Luther King Jr. Fought so much for peace that it cost him his life. Like father, like son. Right? If we're going to share in the likeness of our Father, then we've got to make peace like he did. Right? His peace came at a cost, and sometimes that's the same story for us. And it may not be our blood or our body, but maybe being a peacemaker costs you your own time, your own energy, maybe even your own reputation. But despite the cost of his own life and his own well-being, God knew that the missing brick had to come from him. He knew that missing brick had to come from him. So, are you ready to stretch out your hands to others and provide wholeness and harmony for their lives? Are you ready to stretch out your hands to others and make peace? Because sometimes when we stretch out our hands to make peace, they're going to end up with holes in them. They might end up with holes in them. Like father, like son. Right? Like father, like son. No matter the pain and the backlash and the adversity and hostility that we go through on this journey to make peace, to bring shalom, we're comforted and defined by the fact that we look like God, our Father. We look like God, our Father. Paul, at the end of his letter to the Galatians, he says, "From now on, let no one cause me trouble. Let no one cause me trouble, for I bear on my body the marks of Jesus." I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. No matter what trouble comes our way, what a blessing it is to live each and every day making peace. And knowing that we're becoming more and more like our Father. And nothing can stand in his way. So are you ready? Are you ready to take after your Father? Are you ready to go out and restore this world to wholeness? Because it's not easy. It's not easy. But this week, I encourage you to look around and find relationships and find people who need peace in their lives. Maybe it's a relationship that you took the peace from. You know, maybe you mistreated a friend or a family member and you haven't admitted your fault. You know, maybe it's peace that needs to be made in a relationship between two people at work. Maybe it's your relationship with your significant other. You know, like we sang before the sermon, let there be peace on earth. This world longs for peace. Right? And sometimes it seems impossible that there could ever be peace on earth. And maybe that's true. But the way that it starts to get better is by you, in your little corner of the world, making peace in the broken relationships that you see around you. So this week, I just encourage you to just live with your eyes open. Right? Live with your eyes open and look around and see what needs to be made new, what needs to be restored, what needs to be made whole. Right? Like father, like son. Like father, like son. The peacemakers are living the good life, for they will be called children of God. They will be called children of God. This morning we want to offer an invitation. If you need prayers or if you'd like to be baptized, you can either come forward or you can find me or Patrick or one of the elders after church. We'd love to talk to you. But that's your mission for this week. Go out, live with your eyes open, and just see what things need to be made whole. See where restoration needs to occur. So if you need anything at all, please come forward as we stand and as we sing. There you go.